Still talking economy, an economist, Adetilewa Adebajo, has said that it is now evident that the cart was put before the horse as reforms in Nigeria were implemented too quickly, devoid of adequate planning and resources, leading to unintended consequences. In a report titled, "Has Anyone Seen a Giant?" Mr. Adebajo, entrepreneurial transaction business manager and CEO at the CFG Advisory, explains that the credibility of the reform program of the President Bola Tinubu-led administration is now in question and a state of quagmire. Now, according to him, he had advised Nigerians in January this year to be prepared to endure an 18-month economic recovery period that will be accompanied by a high interest rate regime to tame inflation and FX volatility. Mr. Adebajo advised that the federal government needs to reset urgently, communicate the benefits of the reform to the stakeholders, and deliver tangible results by year end. He maintains that the sell down of oil assets to raise $50 billion to ease the debt burden and refinance NNPC for sustained revenue and FX availability is long overdue. To further discuss this, I'm joined by Dr. Nnaemeka Onyeka Obiaraeri, development economist and investment banking executive. Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
So as of January this year, you presented what has turned out to be, a bullseye prediction of accurate Nigerian economic forecast. What gave you the insight?
I have been long in this industry as an investment banking executive of over 23 years standing. So I clearly understand how to study and read the market. I understand the fundamentals, the cause and the effect of policy and program decisions, and where it may ultimately lead. So, but basically, I also do not agree with those that stated that the government put the cart before the horse. As at the time President Tinubu became president, it was imperative and urgent that those reforms was executed the time he executed it. Remember, he inherited a country that had an external debt position of about $41 billion, up from $10 billion level when Buhari became president. He inherited domestic debt of over 26 trillion naira, and then there is ways and means of 23 trillion that was not even securitized. So practically Nigeria was bleeding, and we had a multiple exchange rate regime that created an arbitrage window for the few Nigerians to make this country. If you look through the history, between 2015 to 2023, Nigeria had massive inflows of over $630 billion across all the forex sources, an outflow of $450 billion, which practically means that net will have had Naira stabilized at that level it was when Buhari became president, if there were no leakages, criminality, and corruption. But Naira lost so much value because most of the 3 trillion Naira that were printed, we are used to pursue the Naira through all manner of games. So what President Tinubu did, the two policies, we are spot on. Removing FX subsidy, petroleum subsidy, and the margin those markets. But one thing they did not do was that they did not back it up with the right leadership and institutional reforms that will have made it to work and yield quick positive impacts. Remember, in 2018, 2019, the current GMD of NNPC made a promise that the refineries will start working before Buhari handed over on May 29, 2023. And on the strength of those promises, I want to believe the president was in a hurry and he announced removal of subsidy with the belief that those refineries will have been working by the time he kicks into office. But unfortunately, those refineries, even up to today, it has not worked. And then on the upstream sector, if Nigeria had been producing 2.5 million barrels of crude oil a day, as we had it before Buhari became president, we will have had enough FX inflow to cushion the effect of the removal of the margin of the foreign exchange market. But these two intervention actions that will have helped quicken the positive effect of those policies, we are not taking. And it is not yet too late. Where I agree with Adetilewa is the issue of the fact that it's a high time that will restructure the oil and gas sector, divest the federal government shareholding in the NNPC from 100% to 30%, sell 30% of the 70% to 3 core investors with technical capacities, and there's 40% to Nigerians, both at home and in diaspora, and then list the new NNPC on the floor of the exchange to make it as efficient as possible. We do this and do an IPO of $20 billion. We'll be able to unlock $60 billion that will help us to further stabilize the economy. The CBN is doing their best.
All right, Dr. Obiaraeri. Now let's talk specifics. You already touched a bit on, the floating of the naira, but let's talk about, looking at the core of the President Tinubu reform, which we're talking about. We're going to be specifying about removal of fuel subsidy and floating of the local currency as well. How do you think they could have done better without, the current pains that Nigerians are actually facing at the moment?
And that's exactly the same thing I'm trying to say. The policies, what they will have done from day one. Now, I want to look at the actions of Nnaemeka Onyeka at the CBN and the actions of the fiscal managers in the oil and gas industry, and you will see what I'm trying to put across. When Nnaemeka Onyeka assumed office at the CBN, the first thing he did was to restructure the institutional arrangement in that place. And he did a massive clear out. Most of heads of department, agencies, and leadership as central bank, over 200 people were laid off immediately. Remember, he inherited $7 billion unpaid LCs. He had to sort out the issues of the ones that he wanted to do. He quickly paid down on $5 billion. And you could see that 5% of the problems we have in Nigeria can only be tackled through the monetary policy. For currently, he has been able to stabilize FX to a certain level. But his job is being hampered by those on the fiscal side. If from day one, when Mr. President assumed office, he had done a massive institutional overhaul at the NNPC, at the NNDPRA, at the Ministry of Petroleum Ministry, and sacked most of the remnants of the Buhari Kantawam era, and replaced them with people who has capacity, just like Nnaemeka Onyeka did at the CBN. By now, we will have started seeing massively the positive effects of the removal of petroleum subsidy and the margin of the foreign exchange market.
Okay, but what about the raising of $50 billion to ease the debt burden, refinancing, of the NNPCL for sustained revenue and FX availability? What about that?
It's a solution that some of us have put forward since 2015. The only way for us to move forward, of course, before you carry out such institutional reforms, you have to clear out the remnants of the old regime. You cannot put new wine in an old wine bottle. Basically, the first thing the president must do, I support that suggestion. I've always been an advocate of us selling down our holding. Brazil did it. Basically, what Mr. President should do, clear out the mass of leadership remnants that were left behind at NNPC. Appoint credible, honest, competent, and the men of integrity in the leadership position at NNPC and NNDPRA. When you have done this, appoint book runners, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Stanbic IBTC, Denham Chapel Group. Put them together. What they will do simply is to start the process of unbundling the NNPC, working with the new leadership at NNPC. Federal government should sell down 70. NNPC today is valued at about $60 billion. Selling down 70% of the federal government shareholding in NNPC to investors and doing IPO of $20 billion will bring in over $60 billion into our economy. This $60 billion will help us to repay some of the debt that we are owing, help us to stabilize foreign exchange market and price stability, and again, help us now to reposition the NNPC in such a position that it can actually go out there and raise funds and begin to explore and begin to increase crude oil output and begin to make those various work. We have all manner of criminality in the system because the system that we currently operate at NNPC is very opaque. And Mr. President can do this. And that is why we beg him every day. The weakest link in his cabinet and his government is the Petroleum Ministry, is NNPC, is NNDPRA. So he must take urgent steps to carry out the same reforms, institutional shake-up that Nnaemeka Onyeka did at CBN, at NNPC, and NNDPRA, so as to allow Nigerians benefit from the very audacious reforms that he executed.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Obiaraeri, for joining us and speak to us on this.
Thank you for having me.